You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hannick here with co-host Mario Ramos-Reyes. Today, we return to a discussion of the American Solidarity Party, our political home. We've been called the party that reads the encyclicals. We surely strive to read the signs of the times. Already the 2022 elections are close at hand. Can 2024 be far behind? Joining us will be, here he is, Patrick Harris. He's just finished his term as the chair of our national committee. Let's begin as we always do in prayer. Come, O Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, welcome, Patrick, and we can see that you've just dropped off children at school. And so I'd like you to begin, if you will, by telling us a bit about your background and your young family.
Sure. And thank you again for having me on The Open Door. I am a Southerner by background. I grew up in Alabama. I currently live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I am a historian by training. I finished up a doctorate in the past year with an interest in modern European history, and I'm teaching right now. But I live here in Memphis with my wife, who is a physician, and our two young daughters, who are 4 and almost 2. So that is plenty to keep me busy, as I think you can imagine.
A historian, that means you know what actually happened. Good grief. We hardly ever run into anybody like that.
Well, it at least gives me an idea of, how little I know about what happened.
Now, before I let Mario jump into this, and jump he will, he's poised. There are people, believe it or not, who say that our party, our beloved party, is top heavy with academics. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair charge, Patrick?
It's interesting. There certainly are a lot of people with, some kind of academic training, master's or PhD, and in the leadership. And in fact, we had a kind of interesting transition in that the new National Committee chair, Lucy Moy, is also a historian by background. In fact, she has much better credentials than I do. She taught at Hillsdale College for over 30 years, I believe. So we went from one historian to another, which was pleasing to me. But there has been some kind of shifts in terms of the professional makeup of exactly who in leadership is over the year. We went through a period where we had a lot of attorneys, and we currently tend to have more academics. But when people, you mentioned it as a charge, and I think what people are getting at sometimes when they talk about that as well, is this just a something kind of for eggheads? And I think the nature of the movement, in trying to present something to American politics that is not very common, that is Christian democracy, which is, not really had a presence in American political life, at least not under that name, necessarily is going to attract people who are maybe a little bit more intellectually inclined. And so, to some extent, perhaps that's part of the nature of it, but we do want to be reaching out to Americans of all walks of life at all times. And we tried to be a little bit intentional about trying to diversify the leadership and the voices that are, present at the table, in the sense of, different backgrounds, different interests, different vocations, that kind of thing. And that's worth keeping an eye on. But at the same time, we've had a lot of success and a lot of growth in the last few years, and it's my hope that that'll continue regardless of what field the committee members come from.
Well, at least Lucy Moy, who's taking over the helm, at least she's from Michigan. All right. Now we go to Kansas now, Mario. What do you have in mind to ask this worthy gentleman?
Well, it's interesting your comment about the party being run by quote-unquote intellectuals. According to my research, all great political parties were led by intellectuals, particularly Christian democracy in Europe, Latin America, always has been intellectuals. However, the tradition there is not that so anti-intellectualist as we may find here. I think it's more perhaps practical. But given that, I think I'm very curious about why did you join the American Solidarity Party in the first place? Was because intellectuals were running the show, or there were some other features in the party that attract you to join the party?
Sure. I joined the party in, I believe, 2016, which was a big year of growth. And so many people that are active in the party, they'll go back to 2016, precisely because that was the year in which, like a lot of other Americans, I was so profoundly dissatisfied with the options that were available. And, from the mainstream parties with, that was the Trump and Clinton election. And as I began to look around for some kind of alternative, I encountered the ASP platform. And again, like many other members, that's going to be for them, and it was for me, a moment of realization that, like, hey, this is a very different kind of political vision. I think this is something I can get behind. I didn't agree with all of it then. But I saw something positive in the platform, something that was missing from the American political landscape. And so I wouldn't necessarily say I was attracted to it because of a strain of intellectualism in the party, at least not initially, but I was attracted to the platform. And, to the extent that the party has always had a kind of a strong intellectual strain to it, it's been beneficial in that it's able to articulate a very different kind of political vision in a clear and convincing and coherent way. And that's always been a strength for us. That's our biggest strength in the party, is that we have latched onto a very good idea that is very much underrepresented on the American political landscape. So the challenge is just getting it out to more people. And when we do that, inevitably, we grow. Because again, it's underrepresented. We found a good way of articulating it. And so, the practical challenge is reaching the vast majority of Americans that still don't know anything about it.
Just one quick question. There is a claim, I think the claim is reasonable, that one of the reason again that Christian Democratic Party are not really flourishing, and I'm saying all across the world, is because the tradition from which we are coming from has lost the culture war. In other words, all the values that we used to have are already gone, so that there is no place from which we can begin forming those political parties. So some people say we need to fight that war first and then build these political parties. What do you say about this claim?
Well, I would agree with the claim that, to the extent that there's been a decline in many Christian democratic movements in Europe, or I know less about Latin American politics, but I'm sure to some extent that's true there as well. It is due in large part to secularization, because these are parties that arose in a context in which Christianity, or at least a cultural Christianity, was part of the default assumption, part of the background of society. And so they were able to use Christian concepts to mobilize people, into these new political movements. And that's more difficult now in a, increasingly secular world, and in the United States, which is less secular than many European countries, at least. There is a lot of political polarization around faith and around Christianity. And so it's very much the case that, yes, the cultural context is different than it was when early Christian democratic movements were beginning and growing. But I don't think that necessarily makes them less important or less vital, that set of ideas, precisely because, at least in the American context, because Christianity has become such a fault line in the culture war. This has been not only has it been bad for the kind of politics we like to see, it's frankly been bad for Christianity. It's been bad for the church to be constantly seen as a political football, to be seen as joined at the hip with first with movement conservatism and now with Trumpism. And part of what we're doing, we have members of many different religious backgrounds, but for me, at least as a Christian, part of the value of what we're doing is to, show that Christian values can be applied to politics in a different way. And I think that is, one of the most important things that we can accomplish, is to, create space for talking about politics based on Christian values in a very different way. And I think that is entirely relevant, even in a more secular society, even in one in which you have this ongoing culture war. And, when it comes to culture war issues like abortion or marriage or so on, the Solidarity Party has a stance on those. So we're not going to back away from some of those hot button issues. But at the same time, we do want to show that it can be, we can enter the public sphere as Christians or as people of goodwill from any background, and approach those issues in a way that is going to be more, more coherent, more honest, less polarized than, what we've gotten used to.
Thank you.
How about your past year as chair of the National Committee? What were some of the ups and downs? What were some of the successes, and what are some of the challenges, to use an elastic word?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, I was chair for about a year and a half, starting last February, I believe. And, during that time, when I first, took on that job, we were kind of coming out of the election season. We were still kind of riding the winds of the 2020 presidential campaign, which is always a time where there's a lot of growth and a lot of excitement for us. And then as we get further away from that, we have other opportunities and other challenges. We've actually done pretty well by our standards in terms of the number of candidates we've been able to recruit. We had, for example, your own campaign in California, or your own two campaigns if you count the recall. And we've had a lot of other state and local candidates. We've had other things happening like revising the website, and we've had a lot of growth on social media. So a lot of good things have been happening, but there have been challenges as well, I think. And I've said this, many times, for anyone who's, kind of followed party discussions, but the Solidarity Party has gotten to a size where it is difficult for us to do all the things that we want to do purely on volunteer resources. And so we are trying to professionalize our operation a little bit, and we haven't really quite got the kinks worked out in that yet. We've had some hires that we put in an executive director role that, for personal reasons didn't work out. And we've had, right now, I think they're trying to get some new staff to do some administrative work, and as well as to, do bookkeeping and things like that. I mean, you don't necessarily want to go to it in detail. It's probably too boring for your listeners, but the upshot of it is that, we need to have a little bit more of a professional operation in order to continue to have the party grow and in order to continue to get the message out there and pursue all the kind of projects that we want to do. We're at a little bit of an ugly duckling adolescent phase as an organization in terms of figuring out how to make that happen. Very few of us are political professionals. I can be frank about that. And so we are trying to make this transition into an organization that is a little bit more professional, a little bit more, organized along set lines, in order to have the capacity to do things at a scale that we've never done before as we look forward to, 2024. And that is the biggest challenge for the organization right now, it's that kind of bread and butter, organizational stuff.
Why, I myself have seen an ad strategically placed for a bookkeeper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of us need apply.
Well, I know I couldn't do it.
But somebody needs to apply.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. I'm not sure what the status on that is. I've been keeping in touch with the new committee since I've stepped down. I know they were working on it. But Zeb Bocelli, who used to serve on the national committee, has been our bookkeeper for a long time. But I think he's needed to step away to kind of focus on his own career and family. And but if anyone is interested in doing paid work, filing our FEC reports and keeping track of our our treasury, then there might be a spot for you.
Maybe Zeb's gone from bookkeeper to beekeeper.
Knowing him, I actually wouldn't be surprised. He's always been one of our more. He's got a lot more agrarian credibility than a lot of our members. So
that's right. Well, I know that Mario has a sense of destiny and fate, and he's pointed out a number of vanities in a world of vanity, and I wonder if he might be thinking about what price success.
So following that, I think you are saying that the party need to get more professional, quote unquote, so that we can have more efficiency and then we can have more successes. And so my question is, wouldn't that strategy make us like the traditional political parties? And doing that, wouldn't that make us start losing our own identity and become another very utilitarian type of political party?
Yeah, I understand that concern, and I do think to some extent there's always a trade-off because, we are a very grassroots organization. We've always been a very volunteer-driven organization, and as I said, we're getting to a point where it's hard for us to do all the things that we want to do without changing our operation a little bit. And there is a danger anytime as an organization grows, as it becomes more complicated, as it becomes more bureaucratic, as you have people who are, working in the organization, maybe, on a career level, that you can lose sight of what the goals were that led you to that point in the first place, that the organization can kind of start to see itself as an inherent kind of self-perpetuating good, that you can lose sight of what the organization itself is actually for. And that, I think, is really a danger with any sufficiently complex organization, no matter what it's for. You can kind of get bogged down in the bureaucratic details. And it's also true that we can begin to maybe think too much about success, however we conceive that, what success would be, and, too little about remaining faithful to our identity, as a party, to the kind of witness that we want to bring to politics. So that's a very real concern, and it's one that I share. And I think it requires vigilance to, maintain fidelity to the vision that we want for the Solidarity Party. I don't think it's inherently bad to professionalize because, I mean, I wouldn't, as I've said, I think it's something we need to do on the organizational level. But we want, the people who are leading that process to understand that they are servants of a wider grassroots organization. And that organization has a set of values that we need to bring to everything we do. And, part of the kind of organizational shift that I'm talking about is that, we would have more paid employees kind of doing the practical work of the party, but we still would have elected leadership. And, part of their role would shift to be a little bit less of the day-to-day volunteers and a little bit more of oversight of the employees and the volunteers and so on, so that our committee members and our other leaders can help maintain fidelity to that grassroots vision. And so that's true with the national committee, who would have that oversight role. And there would also still be a really important role for our state chapters. We want stronger state chapters. And in fact, we want, even though I've talked about professionalizing, we want more volunteers, not fewer. And so, I'd like to see more kind of organic bottom-up engagement from the states. California, where James has been one of our strongest chapters in that respect, and I'd like to see that model replicated across the country. And so I do understand the concern about professionalization, but I don't just want to see growth in the kind of top-down bureaucracy of the party. We also want that kind of bottom-up growth. And in fact, that's even more important. And as a party that believes in subsidiarity, that's always going to be a special concern for us.
Not to be dismal, and I do share exactly the ideas that you've just expressed very well. But once upon a time, there was something called the Jasmine Revolution, highlight of the Arab Spring, Tunisia. And I guess in the last couple of days, Tunisians have voted more or less without corruption for a return to a one-man rule. And Tunisia had been seen as the real success story of the Arab Spring. But that success has come to an end, at least for the time being. Now, everything is what it is and not another thing, and that's one of the few statements that I make that Mario doesn't dispute. Everything is what it is and not another thing, but as a historian, I'm sure you're most aware of this dismal cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll admit I'm not an expert on Tunisian or Arab politics, but there is it's very difficult to create a kind of sustainable open political system, and the Arab world in particular has had a lot of difficulties with this in the years since the Arab Spring, partially because the electoral alternative to dictatorship in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, has been Islamism, which brings its own set of concerns. And so often these kind of strongman figures have been able to credibly claim that they're the only ones able to maintain a kind of stability or any kind of modicum of an open society against that current. And it just shows that, something that we sometimes take for granted in the West is there's a kind of necessary connection between democracy, that is between, majoritarianism, between the ballot box, and liberty, or, depending on what you mean by it, maybe, liberalism is what people are often talking about, is there isn't a necessary connection between those things. We often talk as if there is, but trying to square them is actually much more difficult than we sometimes assume.
Well, I guess we could say the party, like the church, will always be in need of reform. Now, you had I thought, a very interesting interview with a party that shares a number of our goals, but I don't see it as connected with Christian democracy as such. And it's the Social Democrat Party in England. I wonder if you would tell us how we are like them, how we are unlike them, how you discovered them, how they discovered us.
Yeah. So the SDP, the Social Democratic Party in the UK, it's a sort of recreation of an older party that was pretty successful in the 1970s and 1980s, and then it ended up, I believe, merging with what became the Liberal Democratic Party. And so the SDP is a sort of reboot of that former party that has grown a fair bit, I think, in the last 7 years or so, although it's still relatively marginal. I don't believe they have to speak in parliament or anything like that. They do have some elected local figures. But as the name implies, they see themselves as part of the wider social democratic tradition. So they're an offshoot of the British labor movement. So that gives you an idea. It's a different tradition than Christian democracy. But they have reached a certain political niche in the British landscape that is not entirely unlike what we're trying to do with the Solidarity Party in the United States. It is, you could say upper left quadrant, that is to say more culturally conservative and more, economically solidaristic, you might say, or, just economically left, if you want to use the quick and dirty language. And so in that sense, we do have a lot in common with the SDP. Now, if you get down to brass tacks of the platform, there are going to be a number of points.
Patrick, we are losing your voice.
Oh, okay.
That's better.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I may have just had myself a little bit too far away from the speaker. So as I was saying, if you go through point by point, there are going to be platform issues that we disagree with them on, or things that are just different because of the UK context. As I said, they're not in the Christian democratic tradition. They're in the labor tradition, really. And they're also, it's in a different political context. The Solidarity Party has always been very strongly involved with people who are interested in either Catholic social tradition, Catholic social teaching, or the kind of broader Christian tradition and what it has to say about politics. The SDP is a little more secular, but there are enough points of overlap that I think we have had some fruitful conversations with them. I think we interacted a little bit on Twitter, and then the SDP leader, William Clouston, invited me for a podcast interview last year, and then we returned the favor by having him at our June convention last year, along with some other foreign politicians and commentators, including the Australian Democratic Labour Party, which has a platform, if anything, that is closer to ours. Their leader came to our convention last year as well, and we had some commentators from Canada as well. So we're interested in kind of these broader constellation of movements that have varying degrees of similarity with what the Solidarity Party is about. But in any case, I do wish the SDP continued success across the pond.
Interesting. Mario.
Well, following this link to this political party, is there any other political party in Europe or any other place with which we in the American Solidarity Party has relationship and interaction or cooperation in some sort?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had varying degrees of contacts, not necessarily formal institutional relationships. We're a young party, so those are sometimes a little hard to come by. But I know we've had a member of the Swedish Christian Democratic Party. It may have a different name, I can't remember. But the Swedish Christian Democratic Party has been on our podcast a couple of times. I know we have some friendly contacts with some members of the Christian Democratic world in the Netherlands. And we'd like to continue to expand those relationships and expand those contacts. As you probably know, we have some of those relationships in Latin America as well. Ignacio Walker from Chile was at our convention last year, and one of our advisory board members, has also had a background in Latin American Christian democratic politics. I believe he's yeah. I won't say further because I have to get my facts straight. But in any case, we recognize that we're part of a global movement, and what that looks like, depending on the national context, can vary a lot. But we want to continue to strengthen those relationships.
I noticed that going back for a moment to the Social Democratic Party in England, I noticed that they support not only the nuclear deterrent there in England, but they support its updating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they would very likely differ from us with regard to our consistent ethics of life position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that here in the United States, we're very well known for being resolutely pro-life, but I think we're not known very much at all for our economic position.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we oftentimes say among ourselves that whatever distributism is should have another name. I don't know about that, but how can we make our economic positions better known?
Sure. It is true that distributism is a little bit of a, it gets a little bit of a reputation of a philosophy that's, mostly expounded by, guys in bow ties who smoke pipes. And I think, and that kind of gets back to the discussion we were having about intellectualism, or whether the party's got, too many intellectuals at the top. I think if you explain to people in concrete terms what distributism is, or, broadly the set of ideas, the set of tendencies that are involved in that economic philosophy, a lot of people like it. The question is how to articulate it. And so we don't always necessarily lead with, the ism. We can talk about the importance of ownership. We can talk about an economy that's oriented towards families, or towards communities. There are different ways to express it, and there is a time and a place for talking about economic philosophy. But I think, an economic platform that, it doesn't necessarily have to be wedded to this kind of high philosophy in a very rigid way, although it should use it and should profit from it. But, if you talk about being oriented towards the small scale, being oriented towards small businesses, towards worker ownership, towards, economic policies that serve, the working Americans that, have a preferential option for the poor and so on. Those things do resonate with a lot of people, I think. And so it's a matter of knowing who your audience is and being able to get that message out there that there is an alternative to, the kind of doctrinaire libertarianism that you so often get from the Republican Party, or, these days a kind of incoherent populism is maybe a little more ascendant, versus, the kind of typical, state-driven solutions that you get from the left. I think there's a lot of space for that, and there's a lot of fertile ground for that.
On the intellectual side of things, I was delighted to see the very positive comments that Alistair McIntyre has made about distributism as such.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he would agree wholeheartedly with your ways of translating that into concrete policies and the like. But it was very interesting for me to see his, yes, this is what it is. This is where it came from. This is how it differs from Marxism, and this is how it differs from capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And you also acknowledge that we should maintain our roots in the intellectual sources. Mario, I wonder, you're just back from Paraguay. I just wonder how these economic issues could be expressed in a Latin American context.
Well, I think, according to my observation, that using term like distributism is talking about something very strange to Latin Americans in general, even for those who are part of the Christian democratic tradition, which are very few today. So I think one of the ways to go is just to explore the long tradition of Catholic social teaching about economics and how economics really works or should work, and what is the leading feature in economic policy, whether it's the state or is the people as such or the market. I think that is the challenge. Now, we emphasize in property rights, and we emphasize in going back to the original farm and all that. That may resonate in certain regions, not all of them. But my point is that we need to find a language which is modern or updated at the same time without forgetting the principles of distributism, without mentioning this sophisticated way of looking at 19th century, the debate between the distributives. I think this is not, according to my view, a way to go. We need to update according to what people are looking at today, the challenges that is posing. I think the greatest challenges for the new generation is being proposed by libertarians all across the board. And I think that we have a lot of work to do in that front.
Perhaps we could look at specific family-friendly policies. I noted that Social Democrat Party in England is clear that it looks to economic questions from the perspective of the family. And now with Dobbs, there are any number of people saying, well, what are you going to do about? And what are you going to do to support pregnant women? And that will take us as well to family-friendly policies. Patrick, I wonder if there's some family-friendly policies, to use the phrase again, that you think are especially plausible and that we should be vocal about.
Well, there absolutely are, and since we're thinking about distributism, there's a famous passage in Chesterton where he talks about he talks about seeing like a little redheaded poor girl,
yes,
right, and then he says, a girl like that must have beautiful hair, so her mother must brush it, so
wonderful.
In order for that to be the case, her mother must have free time. And, in order for that to be their case, there must be a redistribution of property. Therefore, there must be a revolution, right? So he's saying, I'll set the world on fire with the red hair of this little girl on the street. Right?
I've used that in classes.
Yeah.
Great. Go ahead.
And so, and that's not a concrete policy, but I bring that up to say, this issue with abortion, right? Sometimes people say we talk about it too much, that we sound like we're a one issue party or something like that, which we're not. But the issue with abortion is it's not just that it's a very powerful, very urgent moral issue, which it is, but it also is connected to the wider way that we organize our economy, the way that we organize our society. And so as you start to approach this issue of mothers and of children, who are in need. And, we're trying to work on the demand side issues of abortion now that the legal issue is back in play with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. The unborn child and the mother can kind of play that role that, the little redheaded girl plays in, Chesterton's passage, which is to say, if you are very serious about addressing this situation, both on the legal side, but also on the demand side in terms of material needs that families have, you will need to go far. You will need to go further than you think, certainly further than, Republicans or most of the, conventional pro-life movement has been talking about in the past. And so it can kind of serve as a fulcrum point for thinking about what it is to build a society and an economy that really values families, that really values children, that does seek to, uphold their human dignity at a policy level. And there are lots of different ways to approach that. And of course, there are, prudential considerations. So let's get down to brass tacks about that. We've actually seen some positive movement even within the mainstream duopoly about this, with the refundable child tax credit that has now unfortunately lapsed. But you saw some ideas about that, not just from the Democrats, but also from the Republicans. You're seeing a little bit of movement within the Republican Party towards being more willing to directly support families. And I think that's something we need to get behind. And it's something that as a third party, we're in a good position to push it, because we can, even if we're not in a position where we're, going to be running the country next week, we can put pressure on the conventional political world and say, look, you haven't earned our votes on this. And there are people out there who support these kind of policies. And this is one of the ways that third parties do find influence is, I would love for the Republican Party to steal our ideas on this, right? Or to move towards more of a solidarist position. That in itself is a kind of success. So, so the child tax credit is, it's a fairly simple, fairly technocratic approach, but that's a good start, right? Moving towards kind of direct support of families. And one of the things that we can do is, seek to push them further on this. So, one of the things that tends to show up in a lot of these proposals for kind of greater welfare provisions for families is they tend to have a child cap. That is to say, like it can only apply to a certain number of children before it stops providing any kind of assistance. From our perspective, I think that's a great negative and something that we should push against, right? So here's a specific policy point, I think that we could lean on, right? First of all, because when you create an active disincentive for families to have more children, that creates exactly the kind of, perverse structures that lead to more abortions. This has been a thing in welfare policy for decades now, right? You don't want to create disincentives for people to choose life. But also because, as a party, I think we, need to go forward with the assumption that children are good. So, they're the next generation. And at a time when, for a lot of reasons, populations in the Western world seem to be starting to crater, that, it's not in our interest to kind of discourage family formation or family expansion. So that's our, that's a very specific example of, talking about caps on, the child tax credit, but that's a specific kind of wonky example of where we can be pressing from our, particular perspective as a family-oriented party. But there are many others. We've seen some willingness from Republicans at the state level to provide support to crisis pregnancy centers since the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That's a good thing, and we should support that. I think we also need to get people to understand that crisis pregnancy centers have always been designed to kind of fill in the gaps of the wider economic and social system, and so they're not really designed to provide the kind of comprehensive access to resources that mothers and children and families might need. So, what we need to be doing is saying, okay, that's good, but you can't stop there. There are, there are other issues that are going to be in play for women if you were trying to truly build a whole life set of policies. So anyway, I could go on, but again, it's like that little redheaded girl. You can start there from the unborn child, and there's so much that you can seek to change from that standpoint.
And yet in Michigan, we have Governor Whitmer vetoing any support for crisis pregnancy centers. She takes that right out of the budget, specifically defunding them. And that's certainly the way it's worked in California. Now, perhaps the very first post-Dobbs abortion-related vote that we have coming up, Mario, is in Kansas. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the framework for that vote?
Well, there is a decision to be made about whether or not we could amend the Constitution so that abortion become not a constitutional right in Kansas. So that we can value both life, the life of the mother and the life of the child. That's a decision to be made on this coming Tuesday. And I think it's crucial, and the debate has been very, very intense. And hopefully, I think the pro-life proposal will win that particular issue. So that's, in a nutshell, what is happening.
Yes, and there's been
But let me...
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
Just a comment about what Patrick just said. And that came up a couple of days ago. A politician from a home country, very well-known politician, Catholic, even though she is a militant of another political party whose platform is more or less Christian Democrat, but not quite so. And she said to me something very, very current, so to speak. She said, well, she's a council woman. She said, the only thing that I'm doing in politics is try to implement policies. And every single time I need to put out fires. I don't have I don't have time to do anything else, like building a proposal, try to propose an ordinance that can build a particular type of institution. So, in other words, she's surrounded by people in her party and the other political party to highly secularize, so that the only thing that she can is react against that. And so she said, well, you talk about the family policies. Well, according to what is happening today, international institutions as we speak are denying what we call traditional family. And that is happening all across, I would say, the world. So we can propose family policies, but what is at stake here is, what do we mean by family? And that, I understand, that is not a political, at least it's not a political issue in that party per se. It's something prior to the political party. So the question of this lady was, what do we need to do in order to have at least an understanding of what, not only what family is, what society is, what subsidiarity is, what solidarity is. We have lost the understanding of those concepts. People don't know what Christian democracy is in Latin America. People are scandalized about that, but that's true. And so the question is, what do we need to do in order to first make those concepts understandable for first the intellectual and then the people in general, so that we can, in our political party, start just implementing and people are really aware of what is happening. That is the situation that we are in. Perhaps in the US, we still have a reservoir of people who have that notion, but that cannot be taken for granted, at least for most people. That's just a comment.
Well, we certainly need to speak up, and speak up clearly, and speak up loudly, and often. And political campaigns, though they're not going to lead to electoral success, at least give us a podium that allows us to do so. The struggle continues, that's for sure. Now, Patrick, we're fairly close to the end of the hour here. What should we be reading? What are you reading? How did you come to read what you're reading? There are millions of books.
Right.
Why, Mario himself contributes to that pile of books. He promises he's going to send me his books, and he doesn't. But at any rate, what should we be reading?
Well, I can't tell you necessarily what you should be reading. You know, there's always more options than there's ever going to be time. I can tell you what I am reading. Right now, I've gone back to reading Solzhenitsyn, the great Soviet dissident. I'm reading one of his novels. It's called August 1914. He had a series of books called The Red Wheel, which are kind of a historical counting of the Russian Revolution, and it gets to some of what Mario was talking about, the kind of loss of this background of assumptions that we bring into politics. It's a very complex book, but a lot of what he explores in that book is something that he famously said when he tried to explain why the Russian Revolution and why all the kind of atrocities under the Bolsheviks had happened afterwards. He talked about hearing from the older people in his youth that they said, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. And he said, I've looked through the history and through the philosophy, and I've, come up with all these different explanations for why that happened, but I've never come up with any better explanation for why things happened the way they did, which is men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. And so that, kind of focus on the transcendent order and what it has to say about us in the political world, I think is, something that's very relevant for us, today, a century after all of those events. So I can recommend that one to you.
Benedict the 16th often used the Latin expression "et si Deus non daretur," as if God didn't exist, Well, we always end our hour with the gospel for the day. And this is a very short selection from Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it." Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thanks so much, Patrick, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
You're on wheels, so keep them turning.
I will. Thank you very much to both of you.
Godspeed.
Thank you.
All right. Good night. God bless.
Good night.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.